the day has been trading. The market opened sharply higher. It stays higher but dwindles towards the closing bell, but still at a record. Volumes are soaring as traders are dealing with an historic market shakeup. The drivers of the day include rising oil prices, helping to drive the Dow to fresh record highs. And sterling slides as Theresa May demands respect from Europe. It is Friday, it's September the 21st. I'm Richard Quest in London, and I mean business. Good evening. We begin tonight with Brexit, of course, and the fact that Donald Tusk says he wants to break the impasse that has fallen over the Brexit negotiations. It's a late development after the EU Council President insisted a compromise is possible. But Tusk's comments on the impasse followed Theresa May's warning that the talks had stalled. The British Prime Minister, in a stern address, called on European leaders to put up a plan of their own, which has yet to be seen. The Prime Minister's statement and her warning that Britain is ready to leave the Union without a deal pushed the pound lower. Now, when it was finally off, it was off 1.5%. 1% of that fall, by the way, happened while the Prime Minister was speaking, and it became ever more pessimistic. So the pound has given back the gains that it's seen over recent days. And the disagreements, what are they now fundamentally about? They're all about integrity. Which common trade area or which country will have to be split? On the one hand, it's the UK, which could be split from Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, bearing in mind, of course, what would happen if the proposal went forward to have a customs union for the North or a European single market. Theresa May warned the negotiations must be conducted with respect.
As I told EU leaders, neither side should demand the unacceptable of the other. We cannot accept anything that threatens the integrity of our union, just as they cannot accept anything that threatens the integrity of theirs. We cannot accept anything that does not respect the result of the referendum, just as they cannot accept anything that is not in the interests of their citizens. Throughout this process, I have treated the EU with nothing but respect. The UK expects the same. A good relationship at the end of this process depends on it.
A few hours ago, Donald Tusk offered an olive branch of sorts. In a statement, he said EU leaders had never wanted to dismiss the Chequers deal out of hand in Salzburg. He said, for the good of the negotiations and out of respect for the efforts of PM May, we will treat the Chequers plan as a step in the right direction. However, while understanding the logic of the negotiations, I remain convinced that a compromise good for all is still possible. Bianca Nobilo is following the developments. Theresa May, certainly one of the sternest and, I won't say harsh, but determined statements she's made.
Resolute, I say that. And she's speaking to her Brexiteers as much as she's rebuking Tusk and Macron for their jokes, which were fairly in bad taste. And when we look at what Donald Tusk put on his Instagram yesterday, where he said, a piece of cake, Prime Minister, sorry, no cherries. That's the respect that she's asking for. She's directing that at him. And I think that's part of the reason that Donald Tusk responded in the way that he did today.
But his response tonight, besides the platitude at the end, really says no more than we looked at Brexit, we looked at Chequers, we considered it, and we decided out of committee that it was best just to say it was a good way forward.
Well, it's a curious statement, because if you read it, the subtext says that all along they knew it wasn't going to work, but they were making nice sounds about it because they were keen for the negotiations to go forward. But he maintained that they were surprised by how uncompromising the Prime Minister was in Salzburg, which just makes us question the competence of the UK negotiating side. Why didn't they expect this to happen? They got it totally wrong. This is a huge miscalculation.
I've just been reading an article that goes through the number of times the EU, since Chequers, has made it clear this will not be acceptable. Barnier has said it on several occasions. Tusk has made the same comments. And yet it does seem to have come as a surprise that the EU was not prepared to negotiate from it.
And that's another thing Tusk says, that he's surprised that it's come as a surprise. But Theresa May outlined in that speech today that they can't accept in the UK this idea of siphoning off Northern Ireland. And she understands that the EU has their position. Essentially, the EU saying you can't have a piece of our market, the UK saying you can't have a piece of our country, and that's where we are.
And that won't change, because I cannot see any obvious, not that I'm bright enough to work out this sort of stuff, but I can't see any way that you can square this circle. You can fudge it.
You can fudge it. You can fudge it. There is no solution that's been put on the table. Usually in these scenarios, even if the leaders involved haven't accepted the solution themselves, there are people, around on the fringes making noises about ideas that could solve the issue. Well, there's none of that. There is silence on this issue. Nobody knows how to solve it. It is the issue, the sticking point in these negotiations, and how can they move forward without solving it?
Finally, on a Friday night thought, it was always going to be the sticking point. From even before they began, the question of maintaining the integrity of the Union through the single market and customs union versus Britain not crashing out with no deal.
That's true. I think the only way they could do it, you mentioned a fudge. Well, at the moment, between the East and the West, there are some checks on plants and agriculture, and North and South, there are checks between things like over cigarettes and diesel. So the EU's trying to say, let's just dial this down. There are already some checks. Maybe there'll be some more checks. And
but even if there were those checks, Bianca, they're technical checks. They're VAT checks. Yeah. To just have those sort of checks would be giving Britain single market access for goods, which is exactly what they say would breach the integrity of the Union.
And what the Brexit Secretary, Dominic Raab, is saying in response to that is, well, we're offering you something that no other country that wants access to your single market is offering. We're offering to sign up to that common rule book. Nobody else is offering you that. And he's saying that's the UK's compromise. And also that there's a similar arrangement with Ukraine that perhaps they should look to for inspiration.
November?
Take a look at that.
What, Ukraine?
Yes, the relationship that they have with the EU.
All right, November the 18th. See you in Brussels, I think it is.
See you there.
Theresa May made her play with the checkers plan. Now she's facing a host of opponents in a likely game of checkers. And they're all making their own moves. Now, first, the EU, Donald Tusk, decides and insists Theresa May needs to shift her stance on trade. Then the second opponent, the Brexiteers, they say the plan is dead as a dodo because Eurosceptics in her own party in Parliament won't accept it. And the third opponent, Remainers. They're all calling for a second referendum. Theresa May has said no. And the last player, the Democratic Unionist Party, the DUP, which opposes any move that splits Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK. Theresa May can't play too hard against them. I mean, frankly, they're propping up her government. What all sides need to avoid is flipping over the board and going home. Joining me on the phone now from Germany is Norbert Röttgen, who chairs the Bundestag's Foreign Affairs Committee. He's a close ally of Angela Merkel. Good to talk to you tonight, sir. The situation this evening very much seems to have deteriorated, or just about into name-calling, but certainly this impasse that everyone recognises.
Yes, you're right. I think, hello, it's my pleasure to have this conversation with you. I think I was confused, to be honest, by the outcome of the Salzburg meeting. What I had expected was that it is appreciated that Britain made a move in the right direction. So I had expected the wording of Donald Tusk from today. But it went differently. It was an out-of-hand rejection of the checkers plan, and the mood got really bad in this meeting. And I think it has a little bit derailed this meeting, and now we have to fix what has been broken at this meeting.
So, really, we can go, I mean, all of us can pass this a million ways, but it's really what the Prime Minister said, isn't it? Are we going to have a solution that creates border of sorts and hives off Northern Ireland, which breaks up the UK, or the single market has to have a breach into that? Which has the integrity damaged? Are you prepared to allow the integrity of the single market to somehow be compromised?
Honestly, I do not really understand what is the integrity of the single market in comparison to the single market. I do know what the single market is, but I haven't understood so far what the additional integrity of the market is. So I think this is a political argument and not really a legal argument. I think it's quite clear. The border issue has to be resolved, and there is one logical, legally feasible way to do this, and this would mean that there will come into existence a customs union between Britain and the European Union, which will grant frictionless movement of goods. This is possible. It is compatible to the internal market, and it is in the interest of the European countries, and particularly of Germany.
That's very much towards the point that the Prime Minister. Let me ask you, sir, the Prime Minister, Theresa May, is going to need friends in Europe. Is Angela Merkel, is it your feeling that the German Chancellor is prepared to move to get a deal and to some extent, I guess one would say, help the British, help Theresa May out here?
Yeah, it's on the one side, Germany is really determined to have a good deal with Britain, to have a very good, intense relationship with Britain after Brexit. We want to have a relationship as close as possible, and we are desperate to work for that. On the other side, of course, it can't be the game who is ready, who is a friend of Theresa May, and who is ready for that reason to make concessions. So we have to do something which is really viable. And for that, I think to have a feasible approach to that would be to appreciate that Britain has moved. And secondly, to say that these are right steps in the right direction, as Donald Tusk has done and said today. But then we have to say there are still some incoherences, of course, in the Chequers plan, and we have to negotiate about these incoherences, and then we will make and will achieve a good solution and a viable agreement between Britain and the European Union. I think this is very much the position of Germany.
Good to talk to you tonight, sir. Thank you for taking time. We'll talk again.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Have a good weekend. As we continue tonight, after the break, get the popcorn ready. It's not a film premiere, nor is it a big football match. Oh, no, this is something far more exciting. It's the finale of the ultimate fight for the broadcaster Sky. And it's gone down to a rare process, an auction. Ooh, I love a good auction.